The Toronto Islands are a chain of 15 small islands in Lake Ontario, south of mainland Toronto, Ontario, Canada, comprising the only group of islands in the western part of Lake Ontario. The Toronto Islands are located just offshore from the city's downtown area, provide shelter for Toronto Harbor, and separate Toronto from the rest of Lake Ontario. The islands are home to the Toronto Island Park, the Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport, several private yacht clubs, a public marina, Centreville Amusement Park, a year-round residential neighborhood, and several public beaches. The island community is the largest urban car-free community in North America. Public ferries operate year-round from Jack Layton Ferry Terminal, and privately operated water taxis operate from May to September. A pedestrian tunnel connects the mainland to the airport, which is only connected to the airport, not to any of the parks. The Toronto Islands are a popular tourist and recreational destination. Bicycles are accommodated on the ferries at no charge and can be rented at Center Island. Canoes, kayaks, paddle boats, and stand-up paddleboards are also available for rental from May to September. A disc golf course exists on the island. The main beach is along the south shore of Center Island, and the beach on the west shore of Center at Hanlan's Point is clothing optional. There is ample parkland suitable for picnicking, several playgrounds, water play areas, and several gardens. During the winter months, people reach the lagoons and Toronto Harbor from the islands for ice skating when conditions permit. History of the Toronto Harbor in 1857. Once a peninsula connected to the mainland, a storm in 1858 transformed the peninsula into the islands. The Royal Canadian Yacht Club's first clubhouse on the Toronto Islands, opened in 1939 Port George VI Island Airport. The airport was used by expatriate Norwegians RNAF pilots in training during the Second World War. Swan boat ride at Centreville Amusement Park in 1984. The park was opened in 1967 on Center Island. The Toronto Islands were not originally islands, but rather a series of sandbars originating from the deposition of sand from the Scarborough Bluffs, pushed by Lake Ontario currents. Prior to European colonization, the group of islands, then peninsula, and sandbars was considered a place of healing, leisure, and relaxation by indigenous peoples. The then peninsula was called or Island of Hiawatha, or menacing, meaning on the island in Ojibwe. To the descendants of the Ojibwe, now the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Toronto Islands are sacred land. According to British Crown records, Treaty 13, often referred to as the Toronto Purchase of 1787 and 1805, included the islands and compensated the Mississaugas with goods including 2,000 rifle flints, 24 brass kettles, 120 mirrors, 24 laced hats, and 96 gallons of rum, valued at £1,700 for the sale. The Mississaugas, in a land claim settlement process, started in 1986. Claimed that the islands, along with other lands, were never included in the agreement, and that the compensation was inadequate. In 2010, a settlement was reached which resulted in a 145 million Canadian dollars payment to the Mississaugas from the Government of Canada. In return, the Mississaugas relinquished their claim to the islands and other lands in the area. The peninsula and surrounding sandbars that now form the Toronto Islands were surveyed in 1792 by Lieutenant Joseph Bouchet of the Royal Navy. D.W. Smith's Gazetteer recorded in 1813 that the Long Beach or peninsula, which affords a most delightful ride, is considered so healthy by the Indians that they resort to it whenever indisposed. Many indigenous communities were located between the peninsula's base and the Don River. During the 1790s, the British built the first buildings on the island. The Gibraltar Point blockhouse and storage structures were built at Gibraltar Point in 1794. The garrison was known as the Blockhouse Bay Garrison, and it supported the garrison on the mainland. By 1800, another blockhouse and a guardhouse were built. These were destroyed in the Battle of York. Another garrison was built, but it was abandoned by 1823 and demolished in 1833. The Gibraltar Point Lighthouse was constructed at Gibraltar Point, the southwestern extremity of the peninsula, in 1809. It is perhaps best known for the demise of its first keeper. German-born John Paul Rattlemuller, whose alleged 1815 murder by soldiers from Fort York forms the basis of Toronto's most enduring ghost story. Although the precise circumstances of his death remain a mystery, recent research has verified many aspects of the popular legend. The two soldiers charged with but ultimately acquitted of Rattlemuller's murder were John Henry and John Blumen, both of the Glengarry Light Infantry. The peninsula was first cut off from the mainland to the east by a storm in 1852. But a breakwater was built, and the channel was filled in by silt. However, on April 13, 1858, the peninsula became an island permanently by a violent storm that cut a 500-foot, 150 meters wide channel. The same storm destroyed 2 hotels on the island. After the peninsula became an island, the Hanlon family were among the first year-round inhabitants. Settling at Gibraltar Point in 1862, in 1867, the city of Toronto acquired the islands from the federal government, and the land was divided into lots, allowing seasonal cottages, outdoor amusement areas, and summer resort hotels to be built. The west side of the island became a destination for the people of Toronto and the first summer cottage community was built there. In 1878, a hotel was built by John Hanlon at the northwest tip of the island, and soon after, the area became known as Hanlon's Point. The family built Hanlon's Point Amusement Park in the 1880s. John's son, Edward Ned Hanlon, earned international recognition as a rower before taking over his father's business. Other notable families on the islands included the Durnans. James Durnan was the Gibraltar Point lighthouse keeper in 1832, and the Wards. David Ward settled on the eastern end in 1830. At the same time as Hanlon's Point was developing as a summer suburb of Toronto, developments were going on elsewhere on the islands. Along the lakefront of Centre Island, large Victorian summer homes were built by Toronto's leading families looking for refuge from the summer heat and drawn by the prestigious Royal Canadian Yacht Club, which had moved to a location on the harbor side of RCYC Island in 18. By contrast, The Wards Island community began in the 1880s as a tent community. William E. Ward built the Wards Hotel and a few houses and rented tents to visitors. The records of the school board indicate that a one-room school existed on donated land near the Gibraltar Lighthouse in approximately 1888. But it was not necessarily open every day, particularly in winter. The school became permanent in 1896, though still with a single teacher. After it burned down, a new school was built. There were 52 students in 1909 and 630 by 1954. As of 2018, the Island Public Natural Science School operates classes for junior kindergarten to grade 6. A residential natural science program which began in 1960 for visiting grade 5 and 6 students and a day care center for children ages 2 to 5. In 1899, there was a colony of 8 summer tenants on Wards Island paying $10 rent for the season. By 1913, the number of tents pitched had increased to the point where the city felt it necessary to organize the community into streets, and the tents eventually evolved into a seasonal cottage community. In 1894, a land reclamation project by the Toronto Ferry Company created space to expand the Hanlan's Point amusement park at Hanlan's Point. In 1897, the Hanlan's Point Stadium was built alongside the amusement park for the Toronto Maple Leaf baseball team. The stadium was rebuilt several times over the years, and in 1914, Babe Ruth hit his first professional home run into the waters of Lake Ontario from this stadium. In the 1920s, the Maple Leaf team moved to a new stadium on the mainland. From 1915 to 1916, a temporary wooden hangar was built at the beach by the Curtis Flying School. This floatplane aerodrome was used for flight training for World War I. In 1937, construction started on a new airport on the site of the park and stadium. The construction of the airport on infill led to the demolition of the stadium and most of the amusement park. It also meant that the cottage community at Hanlan's Point needed to be relocated. The residents were given the choice of either moving their cottages further south at Hanlan's Point or resettling on Algonquin Island. Originally, Algonquin Island was simply a sandbar known as Sunfish Island that was expanded by land reclamation operations. In 1938, streets were laid out to accommodate 31 cottages that were moved by barge from Hanlan's Point. The airport opened in 1939. Formally named the Port George, the 6th Island Airport, after the reigning monarch of the time. During the first few years of the Second World War, expatriate Norwegian RNAF pilots in training used the Toronto Island Airport as a training field for both fighter and several accidents, including one where a pilot under instruction clipped the funnel and mast of the island ferry boat Sam McBride and crashed, led to the training school being moved north to Muskoka, Ontario. A park on the mainland called Little Norway Park commemorates this period.
The Jack Layton Ferry Terminal, formerly called the Toronto Island Ferry Docks, is the ferry slip for Toronto Island ferries operated by the City of Toronto Parks, Forestry, and Recreation Division. 3 ferry routes provide transportation between mainland Toronto and Centre Island, Hanlan's Point, and Wards Island in the Toronto Islands, with levels of service to each destination differing depending on time of year. The terminal is located in the Toronto Harbour, behind the Weston Harbour Castle Hotel, and adjacent to Harbour Square Park. It is south of Bay Street and Queens Quay in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The Toronto Island Ferry Docks were renamed the Jack Layton Ferry Terminal in 2013 to honor Jack Layton, who served as a Toronto City Councillor and was later leader of the New Democratic Party (NDP) and leader of the official opposition. The main departure point from the city to the island has been at the foot of Bay Street since the 19th century. First terminal location 19th century 1918. The first ferry terminal at the Toronto Harbour, c. 1899. The original terminal was located on the east side of the Toronto Harbour Commission building at Bay and Harbour Streets. The terminal in the picture was destroyed by fire in 1907 and was rebuilt. A steamship terminal and berth areas was added to the east side. The site is now filled in and occupied by a parking lot. Second terminal location 1918-1972. When the infilling of the harbor took place after 1918, the docks moved to Queens Quay, west of Bay Street. It had a waiting room for and was heated in the wintertime. 5-6. This terminal would be there until it was demolished during the redevelopment of the Toronto waterfront that began in the 1970s. The Harbour Square condos are built on the site. Third terminal location 1972 present. The third terminal opened in January 1972, shifted about 100 meters to the east. 2. The new terminal was part of a planned $85 million waterfront project started in 1964 and completed in the early 1970s at the cost of $250 million. 5. That would see the Bay Street shipping slip filled in and Harbour Castle, Hilton, and Harbour Square condos built. 7. The cost of the new terminal was Ca $519,005. But unlike the previous terminal, no waiting room was provided as the ferry stopped operating during wintertime. 4. And had crowding problems starting in its first season. 2. Metro Parks Commissioner Tommy Thompson would have liked to see the new terminal right at the foot of Bay Street, where the old one was, but it was placed where it was to be part of the condo hotel complex. 256 minor upgrades have been made to replace the original ticket booths with newer and larger ones located just north of the original entrance and partially covered by a canopy. Statue of Jack Layton at the terminal. The terminal was named in honor of Layton in 2012. In 2012, the Toronto City Council voted unanimously to rename the terminal in honor of the late Jack Layton.